jump in and ask a question. I'd love to answer them as you go. If in the meantime you think of a question as I'm speaking, and if you want to jot it down, you could do so in the Q&A section of this webinar, so that way we make sure we address it at the end of it. But if not, at the end of it, we'll definitely spend as much time as you want to address all of your questions and share our thoughts on that. So with that said, excuse me, I'll get started here. So just to give you a little bit of insight, a few weeks ago on the 4th of April, we decided to do a webinar for students and counselors and parents in India. We actually, I think several of you on this call, or at least a few of you who are on this call right now, were also participating in that. We had a pretty strong showing, about 200 people attended it, and a breakdown of those people here. The majority of them were college students looking for graduate programs, followed by high school students. Then we had a group of high school counselors, some college faculty and administrators across the country in India, and a few parents as well. And this was 3 weeks ago. It feels like a long time ago, because a lot of the questions they asked, we tried to answer them with the information available at that point. But obviously much has changed and much is developing. So the conversation we had this morning with the counselors, there were additional questions. I'm going to share with you a few of those questions that the counselors asked this morning. But that was about, like I said, on the 4th, so about 25 days ago. These were the responses from a couple of the audience poll that we did. The majority of the students in our audience, as we've always experienced it over the years in India, the students that we cater to, the majority of them still are interested in the US as their top choice. Canada being a close second if you take out the other portion of it, followed by the UK. We wanted to specifically ask them this question about whether the pandemic has affected their plans to pursue their study abroad this year. The majority of them were kind of in a holding pattern, obviously, because they weren't sure what was going on. A lot of the questions they had back then still are valid, because there's still not a whole lot of information about fall 2020 plans, whether universities will be in session, if not, what the arrangements will be for international students, and if the universities were in session, will the embassies be open for them to get visas? So a lot of students kind of waiting to see what's going on. But the great news of that was, of all the students that attended our webinar, none of them said that they had plans on canceling their study abroad goals for this year. So which means they for sure are going to do it, but waiting to hear in terms of what the universities are going to do in the coming months. Excuse me. These are just a handful of questions that we've been hearing from students and parents and counselors. Obviously, I think that the first question that everybody asks is, what is going on in terms of fall 2020? And I think I'll speak for everybody here that, when I say we really don't know, because there's a lot of chatter, a lot of conversation, but I don't think anybody has a definitive plan for fall 2020. And like I was just saying, even if the campuses tried to open, will international students be able to come back or come, because the embassies are still closed, and I don't know how that impacts visa issuance and all that. And then subsequently, a lot of other questions related to that. If universities go online for fall 2020, how will it function? Will there be a discount on the tuition? How will science labs function if I can't be on campus in a lab? As you can imagine, you probably have heard 1,000 of these questions from all over. So just to reiterate that these continue to be the questions. Obviously, parents are concerned more about the security and safety of students, and how will universities handle health, safety, et cetera. Students are focused more on summer internships and long-term job placements. Counselors were curious about how are universities planning to recruit now that they can't visit us potentially for the foreseeable future. So we've done our best trying to answer, excuse me, and as you know, most of the answers that we can give is still yet to be determined or TBD. So that's what we've been sharing with the students and the parents and the counselors. And I would love to hear from any of you here if you have some definite plans for fall or for recruiting plans as we go through this webinar this afternoon. So that way we can share that information with our constituents on the ground in India. If I were to tell you what students and families and counselors are thinking about, particularly the students, especially the ones that I've been speaking to personally, students are cautious but optimistic about the future in terms of their ability to come here for fall 2020. But in addition to that, their questions and concerns are not just limited to the fall 2020 opening, because they do know that whether it's fall 2020 or spring of 21 or a mix of something or a late start to fall, whatever it may be, they're more concerned about their ability to come here, do internships, their CPTs, their OPT, the news they're hearing about the US economy, the unemployment here, jobs, everything is a concern right now. And obviously we can't really alleviate any of those concerns because we quite don't know exactly what we're going to do. To add to that, the rupee has devalued a little bit, almost 10% in the last 8 weeks. So now it's 76 rupees to a dollar. So parents obviously are concerned about their ability to pay because economy is also impacted in India. So they're still worried about their ability to pay if it continues to go bad and things are even worse come August of 2020 compared to now. So that's something that you're going to probably hear a lot of students. And I would say in preparation for that, I think you might expect a lot more students. If we were to go live in fall 2020, a lot of students would be curious about additional scholarships to help pay for college. There were still concerns about travel restrictions, visa issuance, et cetera, because there's still no clarity about the embassies opening up. Questions about how they would, if universities opened, but the embassies weren't open, how will they actually attend school? And to make matters worse, as you all know, I think it was last week, the tweet that Trump sent out about banning immigration or suspending immigration caused a lot of concern on the ground, but we addressed it. We sent out a message to all of our constituents to inform them that the EO was only about permanent residency, not about non-immigrant visas. But we just have to wait and see if anything else changes with that. Like I mentioned earlier, parents continue to be worried about safety and about scholarships because, like I said, the economy is also being impacted in India. So I don't think anything I'm going to say is new, but I did want to have this discussion with you about the new normal that we're going to be about, that we're entering, that we already are in. Life as we know it has changed, and so has our work, and it won't be the same as before, maybe change forever. Interestingly enough, over the last 6 months or so, especially fall recruiting season and through winter, I've had many conversations with our partners, with our travelers on the ground in India, and especially within our team, both here and in India, about how traditional recruiting needs to change a little bit. A lot of it was really focused on, or at least as a result of the experiences that we've had in India. And obviously I've been recruiting in India for about 10 years now and done 40 plus trips, visiting schools and colleges, and just realizing that there is a glut of information out there. Schools and students are getting a little fatigued with the hundreds and hundreds of universities that come, whether it's a school visit or an education fair or an agent event or whatever it may be. So we've been talking about it and preparing to develop solutions to offer to our partners here in the US about doing things a little differently. But obviously, we also expected that it might take a while for some of these changes to take effect. And working with universities, as you all know, it's not easy to change status quo here. But obviously, nobody expected a pandemic to come and interrupt our way of work. So in a way, for us, from a Gen Next perspective, the direction that we were headed in, the conversations we were having, all of a sudden had to be expedited. So we've been stepping on the gas, all the conversations we've been having about how would we change traditional recruiting and how would we alter the way we would do things on the ground. We were expediting and accelerating it so that now we're almost prepared to implement some of those changes. The comment about information has lost its value, I make from the perspective that, as you know, there's so much information being pumped out there. And unless and until the receiver of that information is able to contextualize it, it's hard to process it and hard to act upon. And that's kind of where the premise was about changing the way we do things is how are we disseminating this information to the students and the counselors and the parents? But we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I think this quote is credited to Winston Churchill, and never let a good crisis go to waste. But I guess we all find ourselves in that position right now. This is obviously a crisis, but let's see what we could do to make it work for the better, work for us as opposed to against us. And so now we're here. This is our reality, right? Things are different. Well, many of us would have been on the road right now. I know I personally would have been in India wrapping up our undergraduate recruitment trip, but I've been sitting at home for a couple of months, as all of you have. So what do we need to do? We need to quickly adopt to new ways of doing things, and whatever that means within each context that you work in. We need to create a new reality. Again, a lot to be seen and discovered as we go through the next few months. But I do want to highlight one thing about creating a new reality. From my perspective, personally, I say we need to create as a field a reality that transcends this temporary circumstance. Yes, we have to react to the reality of COVID-19 and what disruption it's brought about, but maybe it's time for us to look at some excuse me, new ways of doing things that is not just for the time being, but for the future. As I think about what we traditionally do, being on the road, visiting schools and colleges and students and parents and counselors and being mobile, obviously, since mobility has been limited, almost stopped now, what do we have? We have to use our imagination and creativity because they're not limited. We need to come up with ways we can continue to engage and converse with the demographics, the constituents that we need to. And then, again, in the same context of what do we do and where do we go, obviously one of the things that I've heard, and I'm sure many of you are discussing this internally within your offices, is how do you go virtual? How do you communicate with constituents all over the world? That's all virtual. And I think the first thing everybody is jumping at least I get the sense, is that let's all go do some virtual university visits or virtual webinars where we invite students and parents and counselors to come hear about who we are. So basically taking what you would have done at a high school or a college, but more on a technology platform. But is that really effective and efficient? And that's something that we should discuss. So when I look at this and think about solving a problem, I'm looking at it and saying, you know what, maybe we need to start doing things that nobody else is doing. In the sense that hundreds and thousands of universities from across the world are all descending upon every target market with the same solution, which basically at this point is virtual webinars, virtual university visits. There may be some role for that, but maybe we can come up with ways we could do something very different that nobody else is doing or the majority isn't doing. Because to me, when we start doing something that no one else is doing, then competition is irrelevant. And maybe that's where we start to think about. And along those lines, what I am suggesting or what I'm proposing is that we talk about stepping away from this predictable path of comfortable repetition, right? Get on a plane, go to a country, go to a city, the hotel, the car, the school visit, a presentation, hand out a bunch of brochures, and then leave. So maybe we need to look at stepping away from that path to something unique, something different, something creative. But at the end of the day, we need to accept the reality, which is what it is, and we need to make a plan, and then we need to move. And we hope that we're, by sharing this and having discussion and having all these conversations with you as a community of international educators and recruiters, we can work together to kind of create some of these things. And then us as an organization that's uniquely positioned with a team on the ground in India and a team here in North America, we can help you execute on some of those new, creative, innovative ways of doing things. And this is something I want to spend another minute on. Again, I hope I'm not coming across as preachy, but if you've traveled with me, you know I harp on some of these things all the time, and I share this from a perspective of being an international student and being here and having spent enough time on the road working with students and parents. Here's what I kind of propose. Each of you has a story to tell in your own way, and how do you tell your story? And the traditional methods, what I've been talking about the last few minutes, is starting to become noise. And what I mean by that is, you know, when everybody's doing the same thing, going out there presenting the same statistic and the same story about who they are and the campus, et cetera, it gets a little overwhelming, and students get frustrated. They're lost in the process. So you basically end up having a lot of noise out there. And so the challenge to all of us, and more for you especially, is to how do you distinguish yourself? How do you distinguish your signal that you want to send from all the noise that's out there? And currently, like I was just talking about, a lot of students and parents, counselors are bombarded with emails and webinars and virtual tours. Can you imagine being a 16, 17-year-old kid, and all of a sudden there's tons and tons of emails or requests from your schools to participate in a webinar for yet another university that wants to present? It's going to get a little overwhelming, and they won't have the opportunity to integrate and contextualize the information, and therefore won't be able to act on it. So that's one thing to always keep in mind, is how do you distinguish yourself? And the second thing, and this has always been a hallmark of our work on the ground, it's not just about information transmission, right? It's not just about handing out a brochure. It's not just about sending an email, but to really have a conversation with the students and their families and their counselors, because that's what eventually yields results. So how do you do these, and what all do you do now, especially in a limited mobility environment, relying only on technology? And those are going to be the challenges that we together have to work toward and kind of solve, right? So basically, what you need is you need access. You need access to students and parents and counselors. You need platform or platforms to communicate your message. And most importantly, you need to position your institution in front of the right demographic. It's the right kind of a student, right kind of a parent, to have that conversation with them about who you are, what your value proposition is, and why they need to consider you as a school of choice. Once you have the access, and once you've been able to position yourself and have communicated that message, then you obviously need to have that conversation. This is where the engagement piece comes in. You need a system to converse with students and their families. It needs to be quick and responsive and efficient. And you need to have real-time support on the ground. And I don't know if anybody here disagrees with any of this, right? At the end of the day, when we approach things, when we're looking at it from a Gen Next perspective, we're saying access and engagement, two cornerstones of recruiting success. How do we do this now in the coronavirus environment, right? So really quickly, I want to share with you a few things that we're preparing and we have prepared already to do to help you pave the way forward for you. I'm a big fan of acronyms, and as you see, the word PAVE really stands for proxy, access, and virtual engagement. What we mean by that is proxy, given the fact that we have a team on the ground across India, and we have a network of colleges and universities around India, access to parents and access to everybody. We are in a position to provide proxy service for you. A lot of the proxy service recently has been on the yield events, engagement campaigns, talking to admitted students to make sure that they're still engaged with the university. Just in the last, I would say maybe 8 weeks or so, our team on the ground has contacted over 4,000 admitted students on behalf of our partners to get their, whether it is get them to complete an application or to ensure that they're fully aware of the goings on campus here and the requirements and preparation for fall 2020. And also being able to facilitate some yield events. We used to be on the ground in India in person, but obviously now many of those have been online. But again, when we host yield events, it's to really make sure that each and every admitted student is getting a personal invitation. Their parents are involved, their families are involved, and they're attending these events. But then really talking about access, at the end of the day, given the fact that at least for the time being, and who knows what's going to happen over the next 12 months, you and I, we're here, we can't travel, we can't be in front of students or counselors or parents. But we are, again, uniquely positioned because we have a team on the ground who's engaging our network of schools and colleges and counselors and parents. So as you look at it there, we have over 650 high schools around the country, over 900 counselors and counseling staff across the country, over 100 universities across the country, and more than 20,000 leads of students and families who are part of our network that we're able to engage and energize and facilitate engagement with. And then obviously one of the additional ways we can help is by virtual engagement piece. I know I spoke a little bit about this virtual university visits and how that might not be as attractive or might run its course in a short time. But we're still exploring ways to make it productive and efficient and not as cumbersome for the students or their counselors. Even this morning on the conversation with the counselors, many of them cautioned us against doing too many virtual university visits. But most of them were interested in the thematic webinars that we proposed. And what we mean by that is obviously you all have faculty and departments on campus that are doing some exceptional work that's very interesting to students. And we've already executed on a couple of them over the last week, and we have several lined up for the next couple, 3 weeks now. One of the ways we can help you engage these students and all the other constituents on the ground is by offering thematic webinars to our network. For example, if you have a chemical engineering professor who's doing some amazing work, if you have a public health professor who's doing some really, really timely work, or anything like that, by having professors host webinars and present information about their area of study and research and degree program and maybe even job prospects in their areas would be of interest to students who self-select to participate in these because that's what they want to study. And that's something that we've started doing and would love to work with many of you to make sure we continue to offer those over the next several months in lieu of just a university presentation. We are accelerating our digital marketing tools. We're working on creating a package of promotional and ad services on Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. WhatsApp is proving to be a really, really good medium for us on the ground in India, excuse me. A lot more students are, and we knew this before, that WhatsApp would be a great tool, but we hadn't really used it to the extent that we wanted to. But now we are using it a lot more, and we're seeing a lot of results from utilizing WhatsApp. We're also going to be launching a couple of tech tools. I don't have all the details for that yet, but we will be launching an app and a chatbot tool to help you communicate to the students and the parents and the counselors all across India and the Middle East. So keep an eye out for announcements on that. Just want to quickly, a couple of slides here about what we've been doing. If you don't know who we are and what we've been doing is over the last 8.5 years on the ground in India, we have visited over 250,000 students through campus visits and workshops and et cetera. Helped students submit over 2,000 applications, visited about 650 high schools in India and the Middle East. I've worked with over 90 plus partners across the North American region, mainly in the US over the last several years. I just want to give you a little bit of insight into when I talk about the access to the network that we're working with. This is what I'm talking about. Quick numbers on the undergraduate side. Between India and the Middle East, through all of our work, currently we have 3,000 12th grade students. So these are rising seniors who are going to be entering their 12th grade year. So obviously matriculating to your campuses in fall of 21. Right behind them is the 11th graders, obviously a secondary target. We have over 1,000 of those students within our database. We work with about 984 high school contacts around the country. We also have more than 1,700 parent contacts for those 12th graders who obviously, as you know, undergrad, a lot of parents make the decision. So we're creating a theme, a channel rather, to access and engage the parents also. One other thing we're offering to all 8th through 12th graders in India is a free career assessment. And this engages the student a little bit more intimately, and we have a little bit more information about these students. As of this afternoon, I actually just checked now the numbers up to 485 assessments taken, and we anticipate hundreds more, if not thousands more students across the country take these assessments, which gives us valuable information about who these students are, what their career interests are, and then obviously we can channel them accordingly to universities and programs. As you all know, that we provide free counseling to any student on the ground in India who wants to come study abroad. In the last several months, we've seen over 400 students, undergrad students, who have registered for advising, for us to advise them for free in India. At the graduate level, actually these numbers are a little bit larger just because there's a little bit more easier access to these students because we work closely with all those colleges and universities. And as you know, grad students are lower hanging fruit in India. We have over 6,000 students that we've received through the university contacts. And as of right now, excuse me, we have more than 3,000 students in their final year of college. So they're going to be graduating in summer of 21, so matriculating the class of 21 for you. And then obviously over 250 plus students have registered for free counseling through us for their grad programs through those 100 plus university contacts. Quickly introduce you to our team. This is the team that's spread out across India and North America. Andy and Ben here work with me on the university side, and the rest of them work on the undergrad and grad counseling piece on the ground and the engagement with schools and universities. So I'm going to pause there. I know there's a lot of information I just threw at you, but I know there's probably going to be a lot of questions. I really want this to be more of a discussion. Just wanted to share with you what we're hearing, and I'm pretty sure this isn't anything new that you're hearing, but we do want to talk about what we can do to help you, what you're doing on the ground. So maybe we can provide some insight into that. So feel free to unmute yourself and start chatting. And if you want to type a question in, you could do that in the Q&A box right there, and Addie will moderate those questions. So with that, I'm going to pause and open it up for Q&A. No questions and no discussion topics?
Well, this is George Burke from State University of New York at Albany.
Hey,
Uh,
George.
hey, Girish, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Good. Couple things. I know everybody is trying to gear up for what the maybes might be. I think probably the best service we could give to students is, as far as the US is concerned, I found it very interesting. A number of the highly ranked universities this week came out with pronouncements that they would be open
Mm,
in, like Purdue and Brown and Princeton
Harvard,
and
yep.
Penn and Harvard. Um, I think they did that to try to get their commits to commit, um, because this is commit time and they
Yeah.
have to have commits in. So um,
What do you
I
what do you make of that, George?
Well, if they they just want to know who they can be talking to as the real realities uncover, probably not till June.
Yeah.
Um, and I think at least then they know who they're dealing with, and they know who they're not dealing with. And so
Yeah.
they can purposely just work with those students who have deposited. I can tell you at Albany, we've set up a program starting next week where all of those that have deposited over the last month and a half, we're reaching out to them and we're offering them special programs and setting up conversations with counselors and our staff and just many other things just to create a communication stream so
Yeah.
that you can purely, truly sort of harness who's most likely coming and or who would come given if everything opened up. Then
Yeah.
who would come or who would you try to service who who you don't know whether they've decided to come or not. So
Yeah.
you can sort of narrow down who you're dealing with, and especially the highly competitive universities that get 5, 6, 7 applications for every um,
Yeah. Available seat. Yeah.
yeah, available seat. They really need to narrow that pack down so they can manage it. So that's my gut reaction. I haven't talked to anybody directly, but
Sure.
I found it real interesting that they all did the pronouncements this week,
Yeah.
and uh,
Because deadline's coming up. No,
because deadline's
I
coming
mean,
up.
I see that, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know, maybe it could be a little disingenuous because who really
Well,
knows if fall's going to happen, right? I mean, if you
right.
ask me, I am pretty certain that fall might not be on campus.
Well, and that's the issue. So you might be able to organize a certain set of online programs, but
Yeah,
some programs that students might need in that entering class
yeah,
that would normally take that first semester, you might not be able to coordinate the online course for that. So, um, uh, I, I mean, I just think there's so many scenarios out there. Until we know how to manage the safety and health issue,
absolutely.
then any plan is any plan you can think of.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, right. You're absolutely right. I mean, for us, I know this is a big disruption to our work and uncertainties,
yeah,
etc. But I also like to look at it from a 17-year-old student's mind, right? I mean,
right.
this disruption to them is even more emotional, much more stronger because, yeah, we're trying to figure out jobs and work and schedules and
Well,
commitments, etc.
and
But they're talking about their futures.
and I think if I was a parent
Yeah,
or if I were you guys, getting questions and what I'm going to do with all of our students, I'd say you set up two plans. You
yeah,
set up, what if I have to stay in my home country? What if I'm going to stay in my home country?
yeah,
Do I want classes online? Don't I want classes online? Just to think about that, talk to your, so you don't make it at the last minute. So all of a
yeah.
sudden visa spots open up to get visas, and everybody rushes in at the same time, and you only thought about one thing. And it's sort of like um, what one of our senators proposed today in the United States Senate, that one of the key things in the United States to manage the virus for the next 18 months is to set up tracking. So he's introducing a bill to taking new graduates from universities, putting them part of a service package, and having them trained, because companies might not be hiring. So
Yeah.
all of a
Yeah.
sudden you take college graduates, you give them a function, you give them some salary, some money, but then they service and they can be
Yeah.
trained to be the trackers for the next year.
Almost
So
like a Peace Corps for the
yeah,
U.S.,
well, it
right?
is. It's going to be done through the AmeriCorps, which is the same as Peace Corps. So
Yeah. No, it's
um,
interesting. I mean, obviously, we have, right? I mean, I saw a QS study that came out, and I looked at some of the numbers, and I was looking specifically at the India numbers, and it said 50% of the students didn't want or wouldn't be interested in an online program. But other question they asked the students, more 50% of them, I think 57% of them said colleges should offer more on courses, which doesn't come. But on the call this morning, when I was talking to the counselors, I asked them, what would students do? Obviously, in India, here's the challenge, right? Yes, a student is graduating high school and committed to studying in the US. They may not have committed to a particular university, but they've applied and they've received admissions, everything. And now they're not sure if they can come, embassies will open, if they get a visa, all of that. And so now they're faced with the decision of, do I just enroll in a college in India? But do you really want to do that as a student who's been aspiring to come study us? So we asked the question of the counselors. I said, how uh, open would your students be to participate in online coursework for the time being, whether it's a semester or a year? And it was a resounding absolutely. So that's something for you as an institution to say, are you positioned to offer a full-fledged online experience to these students come fall 2020? And I know a lot of universities are working on it because they obviously had to go quick online in the spring, but now they'll have the entire summer to work, plan, and execute on a much more robust online platform. So lots of issues on the ground. And for a student, why would they commit? Because they don't know. And they don't know if they can come here and what happens to internships. What happens 4 years down the road if they can't get a job? Or if you're a grad student, that's 2 years from now. Can you get a job in 2 years? Will the economy be here? And those are all the unknown. We can't really answer for that.
but Girish, there's really another thing that has been just triggered. It was coming anyways. U.S. higher education was going to have to go through a downsizing, and it's this is making it a reality.
Yeah.
There are many universities um, that students may be wanting to go to, or thought that that was on their list, and those schools are cutting back programs, and they're cutting them back over the next month to month and a half. And so in doing that, the schools are not going to look the same as they were when they made applications in December.
Absolutely.
And and and, and so one of the biggest things from your perspective that you all have to put in observation and put in the mind of the student, make they need to watch. Let's say they've got 3 or 4 schools on their list. They need to find out if those schools have have announced cutbacks, where those cutbacks are going to come from, and whether those schools are really a school of their choice anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean all cutbacks are going to be bad at a school. Some of them are, they're not going to touch their strong programs, but um, uh, if
No,
they're
absolutely. I mean, I think a lot is up in the air. So
well, a
I think
lot
we'll just have
is
to wait and
what,
see.
well, I'm going to share with you, there's going to be more definitive moves in cutbacks over the next uh, 35 days then we'll know on the whole testing and health issue. So they need to factor that issue in as well in their decision making. And
I agree.
again, those graduate students, because of these cutbacks, one of the things that may be slashed are GAs and TAs.
Yeah, a
So
lot
those,
is yet to be determined. So yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you, George. I know this is going to be an ongoing conversation on many
yeah.
fronts.
So those
We
are
I know
have
just
a,
there's some
thoughts.
other questions coming up. Eddie, are there questions that
yeah,
we need?
we do. We have a couple of questions lined up here. So Petra Marlin asked, what kinds of opportunities does this current environment possibly open up for universities new to the Indian undergraduate market?
Hi, Petra. Hope you're doing well. I think I wouldn't say it's a level playing field. Obviously, those institutions that have a good brand recognition on the ground in India will continue to do well. The challenge will be for any institution, for that matter. It doesn't have to be somebody who's new coming in to the market. There's a lot of institutions who have been active in the market, but not enough that they've become a brand on the ground yet. So for all of those institutions, there's going to be a significant, I don't want to say uphill challenge, but there's going to be a significant challenge to make sure they're getting in front of the right constituents on the ground. But that doesn't mean there isn't an opportunity. I think there's probably even more opportunity now because students are starting to realize that, you know what, Ivy Leagues aren't the only thing out there. There's probably multiple other universities they can attend, particularly if your university is a lot more cost effective. So if you're from an institution that has some strong scholarship programs, that has great corporate connections for internships and jobs, which I know every university claims that, but if you can really offer that value proposition, particularly from a scholarship or an overall cost of attendance standpoint, you're going to probably have a lot many more students interested in this cycle than you probably would have been in the past, given everything that's going on from an economy standpoint, from a rupee value standpoint, and just overall exposure to new opportunities. So I would strongly urge that you continue to, if you've already started, that you continue to be present on the ground. And if you haven't, this may be a great time to really get out there and start to build some inroads on the ground with the constituents.
Yeah. Okay. We have another question from a participant. What ideas do you have for universities who have low apps from India to begin with?
You know, it really depends. I look at any university in two different ways. One, regardless of whether it's low apps or a large number of apps, the question will be, let's analyze that data. Where are the apps coming from and how did they arrive? Was it because of some effort that you expended, or were there other means that the students found out about you? And what were the results of that? Like, even if you had 10 apps and you admitted 5 students, what was the yield on that? And why didn't you yield all 5 students? So what could have been done to yield those? And then obviously the second piece of it is really getting out there and marketing and positioning yourself. That obviously will take a lot of different forms. And again, when we talk about virtual opportunities to present your campus and your faculty and your program offerings on the ground in India, you're not limited. And take this with a grain of salt. Here's what I think of. In the past, you may, as a smaller school or a newer school to India, when you go to India, or if you went to India, you're limited, right? You can only do so many trips to India. You can only be in so many cities. You can only visit so many schools or visit with so many counselors. But now the virtual playing field is almost even, right? Because you could do this across the country. That's one thing that we have found just in the last couple of weeks. Like last Saturday, we hosted a webinar for one of our partners And by all measures, this would be considered an institution that doesn't really have a brand on the ground in India yet. They're just starting to. But there were over 30 students, I think, who attended it because they wanted to particularly hear about the program that was being presented. Now, these 30 students came from all over the country. For that university representative to travel to all those cities would be impossible. So this is a great opportunity for you to leverage the technology to be in many places at once. And we'd love to have the opportunity to help you do that.
Okay, our next question comes from Mr. Roderick Malcolm. Hi, Rod. If we agree that we are looking at a wait and see situation, if there is an opening, which schools would best be in a situation to host students?
You mean in the US? Which university would be best suited?
Rod, can you chime in?
Yes. I'm speaking about maybe large versus small, large populations, small populations. Universities are schools that may already have an advantage in terms of smaller populations to deal with.
Mm-hmm. And Rod, how you doing, man? That's a great question. I mean, you can look at it in many different ways, right? On one hand, if you are a smaller school and you have a smaller community to manage, you can articulate that to the students out there and the families out there, especially the parents, to say, hey, listen, we have a manageable community and the size of a community. We can protect them, and we can test all of them, and we can do contact tracing, whatever that is recommended to be a safe way to bring students on campus. You can obviously articulate that. On the flip side, if you're a large institution, I mean, like Purdue and the letter that the president sent out, a lot of different things. And I was reading it, I'm like, I'm really not sure how this is going to work. And I know a lot of universities are going to be put out a lot of that communication. They may, based on their reputation or their brand, might be still able to convince a parent to say, no, we're a good brand. We would never jeopardize our brand. And we will still want you to come because we can provide you with that safe environment. So to me, it's not one or the other. It's all about how you communicate that value to the parent. Because at the end of the day, they're all worried. Every parent I've talked to over the last 6 weeks, one of the first things they say is, I don't know, what is the guarantee that my kid will be safe when they come, right? As all of his parents can attest to that. So it really depends on how you communicate that to the students who you're recruiting and their parents to say, hey, we got this covered. And here's why we can convince you, or we can at least guarantee you that your student's going to be safe on our campus. Does that answer that question, Rod?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rock chalk.
Rock chalk, baby.
All right, so Nimraz Ortiz Diaz asks, since online education may be the only option for students in the fall, what can universities do to make it more worth their while?
I think the biggest thing that everybody has on their mind is the cost of it. The first question I've heard from all of our constituents on the ground as it relates to online education is, will we have to pay the same? And it's a valid question, obviously, because if you're, let's say, $30,000 a year in tuition, would I have to pay the same $30,000 for me to sit at home and take classes on my computer? So if your institution is moving in that direction to make a commitment and saying, you know what, we're here, I know there's a lot of uncertainty, and as we plan and prepare, the fall is going to be online, and if it's going to be online, here's what we're going to offer. We're going to offer you a better value for what you're missing out, which is the campus experience. How do you put a dollar figure on that? I don't know. There's no real percentage. But I think that would be one of the biggest ways you can convince students to stay with you through this journey till we're on the other side of it. So that's one thing for sure. And all of the other elements of what your online experience will be like, their ability to build communities while still being in their homes will also be key, I think. Obviously, they want to come here for diversity and for interaction with American students and faculty, et cetera, which would be very difficult to accomplish online. But as much as you can communicate in terms of how you would make it viable, that would be great. But number one, cost. If you can reduce the cost of it, I think you'll have some takers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so one of our participants has asked, what are you hearing, if anything, about whether India will allow Americans to travel to India in the fall? And will schools want us to visit?
Great question. From a government standpoint, as of right now, obviously the country's closed. There's a lot of questions, right? If they were to open, would they mandate quarantine for 14 days when you enter the country? I mean, we could do the same thing here, right? For any traveler coming in from abroad to say, hey, you're welcome, but we're gonna force quarantine you for 14 days. If that's the same on the other end, you really can't obviously afford to travel to India to recruit and be in quarantine for 14 days. So that's one thing. Two, there's obviously a concern, and this came up a couple of weeks ago when I had a conversation with the high school principal in India, and she said, well, I think right now, I don't know about August or September, but right now, if things were open and we could travel, I think schools are very hesitant to open up their students to be exposed to others who are not essential, who don't necessarily have to be in school. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens in August and September or for the rest of the year, if ever we'll get to a point where not only will the country allow you to just come in and start working immediately without a quarantine period, and then secondarily, if the schools are able to host you. This is what we've been working on, right? So our contingencies as an organization is to say, hey, let's assume that trips don't happen. Let's assume that we can't go to, like, even I can't go to India and get into a school or do a conversation. What are the other ways we could do it? And we're leveraging our team on the ground. And we're so fortunate that we're equipped this way, that we have a strong team on the ground that can do a lot of work. And I'll just add this, at the end of March, our goal was when the country shut down for foreigners, we were on the impression that our staff in country could travel and visit some schools and universities. But immediately right after that, maybe in a few days after that, the country shut down and went into lockdown. So even our staff can't travel. But we're still equipped in real time to be able to do things, to communicate with schools and counselors and do all kinds of engagement virtually or on the phone or through WhatsApp. That's one element. And if the country were to be open, just to internal travelers to move around, our staff can do some of the proxy visiting and go visit schools and colleges and present the partners that we work with. So as we know more, we'll keep you posted on it, and we'll be announcing various strategies and initiatives that will work best for us over the next several months.
We've worked through the questions submitted through the Q&A box. So if folks want to sort of chime in and ask verbally, here we go. So Nimrod Ortiz-Diaz asks, for students who may opt out for an education in India, since they may not be interested in an American education online, are Indian colleges planning to be open, or will they be offering online options as well?
Right now, everything in India is also online. That's a really interesting question, because I think I alluded to a little bit earlier about how a student who's been wanting to come to the US, who for many reasons can't come and might also not be interested in the online access to that education, will they decide to go study in India? That's a big question for the student and their families to wrestle with, because they have to make the decision of whether or not it's a smart thing for them to, first and foremost, apply to an Indian college now, right? It's already almost May. They haven't done it up until now. But the good thing is colleges are going to be accepting applications starting now for the fall. So there's still a window of time for them to apply and get into a college. But it's the same challenge, right? The reason they originally thought about coming abroad was they weren't happy with their choices in India. And I don't think this pandemic would cause them to give up on that long-term dream. So the question then becomes, do they attend an Indian institution? First of all, apply and get into a school of choice that they have and attend that institution for a semester or a year maybe, and then transfer. Will those transfer credits hold? Will any of that be feasible if they eventually want to come here in the fall of 21 when hopefully we'll be back to full normal? So that's a very interesting question. And even this morning, we talked about that a little bit. The counselors that we spoke with, the majority of them were under the impression that students, given that they're so comfortable with the online, given that they're currently as a high school student or even as a college student are doing online courses, might be warming up to the idea that online education might not be that bad, especially given the circumstances. So that's one thing. So they may be almost open to doing this, even though they're not able to come here. Two, who knows if Indian institutions will be open in the fall? Indian institutions might also be online. And so if I was a student about to go into college and I've decided if I want to go to the US or another country or stay in India, and if even that option is online, which online experience would I think would be a little bit better? And obviously everything that we're doing obviously is to promote the idea that even if it's online, you'll have a much better education and experience from an American university or a global institution as opposed to an Indian institution. So that might hold true as well, and they might make those decisions. To be honest with you, I mean, personally, I've had many discussions about this. If we can't open up campuses in the US, how would an Indian institution be able to open up a campus and host 30,000, 40,000 students with no tests and no vaccine and no, cures, right? So it's an interesting situation. But if I were you and I was working with my group of admitted students, and if online fall 2020 was going to be an online, for sure, whenever you make that decision, I would do everything in my power to make sure that the student considers doing my online program as opposed to something else, and especially an Indian education. And then, like I said earlier, if you can somehow figure out a discount or additional scholarship or something for the online experiences, that would go a long way.
Awesome. Thank you for your help.
Yeah, thank you. What school are you with?
University of Arizona.
Arizona, yay.
Yeah.
You work with Luis?
Yes, I work with Luis.
Yay. Tell him I said hi, please.
I will let him know.
Yeah.
All right, Amber Longton has asked, is there any chance more families would pivot back to the focus on sending a student abroad for graduate school, which is less time and has additional funding opportunities, and then turn away from the recent growth in undergraduate studies abroad?
Amber, no, I don't know if I would say that. I think that the growth that we're experiencing, and I predict that we'll continue to experience in terms of the undergraduate interest from India to come study in the US, I predict that it'll continue to grow. There may be a small pause because of this, but the pause is going to be across, right? Not just undergrad students deciding not to come, while grad students will come. If I were to play it out in my head, I would say, if I was a grad student wanting to come study here going, all right, the US economy is taking a hit. We don't know what's going to happen to OPTs and job opportunities, et cetera. And in 2 years after I start, I have to be looking, or a year after I start, I have to be looking for internships and I have to be looking for full-time jobs, et cetera. And the country might not have recovered yet. So would that give me pause? While on the other hand, if I was an undergrad student, whether I start in the fall of 20 or fall of 21, I'm looking at a 4-year trajectory and say, in 4 years, definitely the US economy will be back on track, jobs will be aplenty, and I will still have the opportunities to do all the things. So that might actually be even better, to give myself a 4-year runway as opposed to a year or a year and a half runway to prepare for what my ultimate goal is, which is a great career. So I wouldn't put it that way. I think now that we have this opportunity to really, And that's what I was talking about earlier, is like changing this game about how we engage these students. One of the challenges that's always been in India is how are we convincing or creating a culture of study abroad at the undergrad level? The grad's always been there, and it'll continue to be there because it's a lower hanging fruit. But with the undergrad students, we really need to do a lot more work to convince them that this is a great opportunity. In spite of it being a very disruptive environment, I'd like to look at it from a glass half full standpoint and say, you know what, this is an opportune moment for us to leverage everything that we can, all the networks, all the resources, all the technology, to get our word out to more students in India who are clearly just sitting there online, not being able to go anywhere, looking for some resource and information. Maybe convince a few more students to consider an undergrad education abroad. So that's my perspective. That's my confidence, and that's what I predict.
I like your positivity better anyway. Thanks.
Thanks, Amber.
So that was the last in our lineup for now. There may be a few that pop up here in the next couple of minute or so, or folks can always chime in verbally.
Yeah. Anybody at an institution that knows for sure what they're doing fall 2020 yet?
Hi guys, can you hear me? This is Adiba from San Jose State.
Adiba.
Hey Girish, that was a great presentation. I got disconnected for some time. My Wi-Fi is acting weird today. But I just wanted to add and, heard everybody and everyone's concerns. But San Jose State University, although we haven't formally announced it yet, we are considering online options for our students for fall. And currently for the spring session, as you know, all the classes that were happening is continuing online. And we know for a fact our summer sessions are going to be online as well. With the exception of classes, I mean, for fall, if we do go online and, that's the only way students can take classes, what I have found that is pretty much like, with the exception of lab classes, all classes should be fine. And in my communication with students, I am seeing that students are not hesitant when it comes to taking online classes. So on our end, what we're doing with our admitted students is encouraging them to, just go forward with the next steps. And at this time, just, wait for the updates and see what the universities are going to offer in terms of deferrals, in terms of online classes. I know there's a lot of panic, everybody's worried about, what comes next, what's going to happen with my internships, what's going to happen after graduation. But I'm pretty sure even SCVP and the Department of Homeland Security and everybody's aware. And, there's so many universities in the United States, so many international students. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of guidance. It's just a little too early to predict how everything's going to go. It's just my thoughts.
No, I appreciate that. And since you're on there, I'm going to call you, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, right? So the questions, obviously, we know that we don't know the answers to many of these, but that doesn't stop the questions from coming. The counselors and the students are bombarding everybody with questions because, like you said, it's unpredictable. They don't know. They're trying to just grasp at whatever to make some decisions. But questions like, if we go online, well, how does a lab work? And I don't know if you have thought through all of that, right? I saw a couple of questions about, will I have to get a visa if I'm going to stay home and take classes? Yeah. My reaction would be, you don't, because you only need the visa to come here when you come here. But in the interim, you can
Absolutely.
just. Okay. So what is the university saying? Like, do you need them to? How are you going to do labs? What's going to happen with students who can't go, who don't want to go get a visa, but still want to continue taking classes online, right? You don't necessarily demand that, do you?
So,
well, I can't hear you, Adiba. Looks like your Wi-Fi went out again. Addie, can you hear her?
No, I cannot.
No? All right, well, maybe we'll hold on Adiba. I don't know if there's others who want to chime in about those questions.
Hi, Addie. Girish, hello.
Lori,
Hi.
Hello, how are you guys?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. So the anticipated date of knowing fall online versus fall opening
Mhm.
is going to be early to mid-June.
Okay.
There's a big meeting scheduled in about 2 weeks with deans.
Okay.
And the anticipation would be, so literally everyone's planning for online and hoping they won't have to use that plan and deploy that plan.
Yeah.
So all of the colleges and departments are transitioning what has not already been transitioned. And that includes more practical application coursework.
Mm.
There are already some best practices for that. So I'd be exaggerating if I said that we were completely all ready for that, but that's the movement.
Yeah.
That's the goal would be by August 28th to be up and ready to completely deploy classes online. The decision to make all of our summer classes, which is a pretty hefty schedule, go online was made almost a month ago. It was made pretty
Sure.
early. And so
Yeah, no,
there's
thank you for sharing that. Because I mean, I've been saying that to most people that have asked me about when these decisions might come. And I've told them that it would be no later than July 1st, because by then everybody should know and for them to prepare for it, the universities, I mean. And hopefully as early as June 1st, they would make those decisions and communicate that. But then, I mean, obviously, no one can predict what's going to happen in the next few weeks.
right.
But thank you for sharing that. I mean, I'm always curious, how does an institution do a chemistry lab online? I mean, I read something about an institution where there was some discussion about how they would ship lab kits to all of their students enrolled in those courses. I mean, I don't even know how that works, but just curious if any institution has made or maybe even did something creative like that this past few weeks when their students have been online.
Girish, it's me again, Adiba. I'm so sorry I got disconnected.
Oh, no, it's okay.
So regarding lab classes, I mean, as you know, we're still exploring what the options are, you know, like you specified about chem lab classes. We have no idea.
Yeah.
A lot of our electrical engineering students need to do lab classes as well. But from my understanding, if we are to be completely online for fall 2020, I'm guessing the lab classes will be moved for the spring intake. You know, we won't be doing the lab classes for fall. I think that's how the university will proceed in terms of assigning classes to the students.
Yeah.
And then you had another discussion regarding visas. And from my understanding, and you know, I've worked as a DSO before, I don't think the student needs to have an active visa. You know, as long as they have the I-20, they are able to take online classes in their home countries and then proceed with the
Do
visa.
you even need
whenever
the I-20?
Sorry?
Do you even actually need the I-20 to take online courses from
Not
around
necessarily.
the world? Not necessarily, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you're traveling, the I-20, I mean, it doesn't even get activated until, you know, you arrive in the US, right?
Yeah.
So,
So
you
you would
know,
have to
lots of
send them
people
an
are asking.
I-20 at an appropriate point of time when they're able to go apply for a visa, right?
Right. But, you know, students have that panic. They want to have all their documents in hand, you know, they just want to be prepared because lots of students are hearing different things. You know, some of us are hearing that embassies might open this summer. Some are saying it could be October. Some are saying it could be February next year. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think things will start to improve and we're just trying to stay optimistic here. I know there's a lot of concerns, but over time, I guess we will have more direction and, you know, how we're going to address this.
Yeah. No, I did hear through the network that apparently embassies in China are starting to go online. I mean, not go online, like open up. And in India, somebody who tried to get a visa interview, the earliest date the system is offering is in November, which may be just something that they put out there when they shut down the embassies. But who knows if that's really true or if they've actually made the determination yet.
Correct. And
clearly, if
also,
that's the case, then no student from India can come here in the fall because that'll be too late.
yeah, some students are also concerned that, you know, if they start classes online, what if they get denied a visa? You know,
Absolutely.
a lot of students are asking that questions. But to their defense, I think, you know, if you already start your program and you continue with it, I think there are better chances of you getting a visa.
I agree with you 100%. That's
yeah.
exactly what I told the counselors this morning.
Yeah.
That they have a better story to tell the consular officer that they've actually started the program. But then again, you know, it all depends on how. I mean, at the end of the day, as you can imagine, there's so much uncertainty. Uncertainty is the only certainty. And so we appreciate you keeping us posted on things so that we can communicate to all of our constituents on the ground.
I would actually be curious to hear from those present if beyond the academic contingency plans that are being made, if there are plans around the other services that universities provide, because students ultimately spend a fraction of their waking hours in the classroom, and there are a lot of other reasons that they're drawn to universities. So I'm curious if, as you're thinking about what fall 2020 looks like, are you thinking also about beyond the classroom? So those other services, are you looking to virtualize those as well for students who might go the online route or have no other option but to go the online route?
Yes, I think we're seeing that happening this spring through especially campus life, student affairs, academic success, the counseling center, all of those places that students use and access. And I think we're going to see it moving forward into fall, not only all of the supports, but all of that, the student life engagement, the creation of community is going to be even more important because people aren't going to be standing next to one another.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Lori.
So many things to consider. Is Jimmy still
Can I?
Oh,
Yeah. I'm here. Hi, Girish.
How's it going, man?
It's going well. It's going well.
I was supposed to be in Missouri last week.
Oh, yeah. I just got back from there, so yeah. No, but I just wanted to add one thing because I continuously stay in touch with counselors and with students, for that matter, in India right now. And one of the concerns that I get from students is if the classes are moving online in the fall. I've never taken an online course. So I'm not familiar with the online system. It's challenging for them to go to a different country in the first place and adjust to all types of different things. And all of a sudden, it's an online portal in a new educational system. And how am I going to be academically successful there? So I think that universities really need to be meticulous and very careful with the support that they give them in order for them to be successful. I think that's a key piece to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head because you're absolutely right. Pedagogically, they're so different, right? So I can't even imagine a faculty understanding what an Indian or a Chinese student, for that matter, come to campus with, let alone just online.
Yeah, right. So that's a huge challenge for faculty members, of course. I mean, that's outside of our scope, but it's definitely something that needs to be, communicated from the university in order for them to feel the reassurance that it's worth for me to go abroad or to stay at home, but joining a U.S. or Canadian institution in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since you are, I don't know how many other Canadians are on here, since you're from Canada, any differences from Canada that you've been hearing as opposed to the U.S. in terms of quarantine, stay at home, opening up of campuses?
No, I think that it's very similar here. I think that we all are hoping to open up in the fall. How that's going to happen from my personal point of view, I have no idea, because I just don't see how you can keep a campus safe in the event of a second, a surge in cases, etc. But that's for the leadership to figure out. I think it's more so making sure that we're giving the students options and letting them know that we got you. We got you. Whether you stay at home or you come here, we have options for you. It's all about that communication and making them feel, the reassurance, feeling comfortable at the end of the day with the decisions that they're making.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's where we go back to like over communicate, because they're questions. And when I did the session with the students, I warned them. I was like, just don't start emailing everybody at a university. Basically, imagine if 1,000 students send an email. I mean, you guys are already overwhelmed with all the work and working from home. That's the last thing you want to do, is send out individual emails to every question, the same question 1,000 times.
Right.
I'm assuming that all of your websites are up to date, constantly revised, constantly updated. So, cool.
I think building off of something that we talked about earlier, just students and resources, one of the things that I get concerned about the most with online, specifically for freshmen, is that it's really hard to create the networks that students need just for internal emotional support with one another if you haven't been able to meet one another. And usually that happens perhaps at our yield events and the things that we're doing on the ground before they come to campus, or when they get to campus at orientation. But if that's an online program, if it's not built intentionally to connect students, and we as the universities aren't doing a good job at helping them build their networks, then you've got a student alone who's doing an online class in an education system for the first time. They don't completely understand, where the participation part's a big question mark, and there's a lot of confusion, and they don't have that group of students going through the same thing at the same time. And that's something you need to think about also with the students that might potentially defer to a start in January. Just because a student's not starting in the fall isn't quite the same as if you're admitting a student in the spring term. You still want to engage them. And so I think that I don't have the answer to that, but I know it's something that we're talking about a lot and trying to think about ways to help students do that so that they can still feel that sense of connection to one another in the university. We haven't decided that we're going online by any means, but I think the conversations here at Michigan State are the same as the ones you guys are having. But that's something that's been on my mind a lot lately, especially.
Well, that's really refreshing to hear, Amber, because, I think in a normal circumstance, when students are coming on campus, I think universities are challenged with creating those communities between international students, amongst international students, and between American and international students. And I think in many cases, they're criticized for what they don't do to help facilitate some of those. So I could only imagine how much more it would be exacerbated by somebody sitting at home in their home country. I can't even imagine. I mean, maybe I'm getting too old, but when I think about online education, it's not my cup of tea. But kids these days are a lot different. So it'd be interesting. What else? Any other questions, Addie?
So I think we've worked through the questions on the Q&A box.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Any suggestions? Ben, you have another poll for us? I mean, and as you continue, right? I mean, obviously, we don't have all the answers. We're continuing to develop the right strategies that enables us to facilitate the engagement that you need. But from our standpoint, we know we're focused on providing you with the access to those students and making sure that you're engaging them, whether it is on the ground in a normal, traditional or a semi-traditional way, but definitely now, since you can't travel, we obviously can provide a lot more support. So we'd love to continue to support you in all of that. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll continue to develop these, especially some of the new tools that we're launching, and we'll be communicating some of those, the tools and some of the other opportunities that we will help create for you as well. So is it all the polls, Ben? Is there another one? Okay, well, maybe not anything else. Oh, yes, most important poll question right here. Well, if there aren't any more comments or thoughts that you want to share, I just want to say thank you again for spending time with us. We anticipate many more such virtual conversations as we continue to develop the tools on the ground, also to make sure that your needs are being met. So I appreciate you taking the time. Stay safe. We'll continue to chat with you both through these webinars and offline as well. Take care and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all.